So, first of all, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. If this is your first Wellness Wednesday, every Wednesday at 1 p.m., I hop on here on a live and do a 5 to 15 minute long little ditty about what is going on in the world of plant-based living, nutrition, mindset, and yoga. So today's topic is about organic food. So one of the biggest objections I hear about organic food is about the price. Why is it so much more expensive? And, when you're on a budget and you're trying to eat a healthy food, then what are you supposed to do when you know that the organic lettuce costs $2 or $3 or $4 more than the conventional? So on this call, I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the impact of organic versus conventional food on the economy, ecologically, and then also on your health. And then finally, I don't like to drudge up problems and leave you hanging like, what am I supposed to do next? So I am going to tie it together at the end with some action steps that you can start taking today that are going to improve not only your health, but also your carbon footprint and allow you to consume more organic foods. So without further ado, let's dive in. So, sometimes it can sound sort of like an elite or sort of snobby thing to want to eat organic. And this is, I think, the dilemma around organic food is that we have it sort of backwards. Why do we consume conventional foods which are sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and grown in synthetic fertilizers? Now, I want to bring some awareness to the word pesticide, for instance. Anything ending in the word side, C-I-D-E, means in Latin, killer, or the act of killing. So that in itself is pretty terrifying. We know that pesticides are meant to kill pests, but what are they actually doing to us internally when we eat them or when we inhale them? Because we know that they're all in the air from being sprayed over crops. And yet we think that somehow we are immune to the damage that they cause. But we have to remember that we are made up of trillions of bacterial cells, more bacteria than we have human cells. And so when we look at something as a side, whether it's pesticide, herbicide, or fungicide, we have to understand that those are in fact having a huge impact on our health, on our microbiome, and on all of the little critters that keep us alive. So the first point here is about the impact on your health. So conventional food is typically very highly sprayed because when agricultural farmers are looking to make a really high yield, very often they're looking for high yield in a low amount of time. And so the way they do that is by spraying a lot of pesticides and different types of chemicals that are going to keep away any types of insects and also are going to speed up the process of how long they have to stay in that space. So things like Roundup and all of these other chemical products that go on the plants to allow them to grow and inflate in a really large amount of time. Now, there are a lot of other problems included in there. So when we speed up the growth process of a food, we actually don't allow for the natural amount of time for the right amount of nutrients to enter into that food. So let's use an example, which would be an apple. Now, let's say that your apple, you have an organic apple tree and then you have a conventional apple tree. Now, the typical apple tree, the organic one, is going to take, I don't know exactly how long an apple takes to grow, but let's call it 6 to 10 months to grow. And then you have a harvest season and then you're going to be able to pick them and sell them, and they are probably going to go off a little more quickly and the yield might be a little bit lower. Whereas when you have a conventional, which is sprayed with a lot of different chemicals and they're using growth stimulants and all of that, then that apple is going to grow in a much more condensed period of time and more likely have a higher yield because there were less insects, less pests, all that stuff. So when we hear this, it sounds great. It sounds like a really great idea. Why aren't we doing more conventional? What's the problem with conventional? But here is the problem. When you grow an apple at an unnatural rate, what you're doing is you're not allowing for the right amount of nutrients to be grown, to be developed in there. So then you end up with an apple that is nutrient deficient. So then you have a nutrient deficient apple, which has also been grown in synthetic soil, which has been grown with herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all of these sides, which we spoke about a little bit at the beginning here. And then you are then consuming all of those chemicals. You are consuming a nutrient deficient food, which actually can take more nutrients that your body has on like stored up to actually be able to rebalance and then excrete. So that is the impact on your health, right? So that's why you want to go for something that's organic, that has been grown naturally, that has taken the full period of time it takes to grow and doesn't have all of those extra chemicals included. You have a nutrient whole food, which means that your body doesn't have to work extra hard to eliminate it and to rebalance after all of this chemical and toxins enter into your body from all of the sprays that have been sprayed on it. And what you're doing at the same time, which leads me into the next aspect here, is you're also supporting organic farmers. So the reason that you're going to be paying a premium on organic food is because it does take longer to grow. And we have to understand that these farmers out there who are doing organic fair trade, all of the good things, they are actually taking a hit financially because they're not able to get the same amount of yield out to the world. So the way that you can help to support your economy is to actually by supporting these organic farmers, by supporting them and doing what they do best, which is making sure that we live in a chemical-free world as much as possible. And also you're consuming then nutrient-dense whole foods, which is amazing. So the economical impact of it, a lot of people look at consuming groceries. Let's say that you have a budget, and I don't want to negate the budget because we all have different stages of life. We all have different priorities. Some people here have families and other objectives that they need to pay for ahead of time. But let's say that you have a budget of like $100 a week on groceries. That might be really big for some. That might be pretty small for others. It doesn't really matter. Let's say $100 is your budget. If you're spending that $100 on conventional foods only, what you're doing is, first of all, you're voting with your dollar. You're saying to those conventional companies that use chemical sprays and pesticides and all of that, keep doing what you're doing. And you're telling the organic farmer, sorry, but it's not worth it for me. And so voting with your dollar is extremely important, especially when we want to promote more organic food. We start to put these organic farmers out of work by not supporting them and instead supporting the big companies that are doing exactly the opposite of adding health to our world. So voting with your dollars is very, very, very important here. The other aspect is that, the short-term cost of spending money on conventional food doesn't have long-term benefits. So when we, in the short term, choose to spend our budget on lower quality foods, meaning that they have less nutrients in them, meaning that they're more packed full of toxic chemicals, heavy metals, all of the things that we actually do not want in our body. What we're doing then is we're investing in our long-term medical care. So that means that years down the road, when you've compiled tons of toxicity from all of these conventional foods in your cells, which unfortunately typically get stored in our fat cells, we call this adipose tissue. And then of course the fat cells grow, we start to see belly fat and all of the places that we don't want it. And so we start to store up a lot of toxicity in the body, and then it begins to overspill or manifest as dis-ease or disease, if you will. But I always like to separate those words because any type of imbalance is considered dis-ease of the body systems. So, what's the heavier cost? Later on in life, having tons of medical bills, maybe having disease manifest and maybe having to deal with that at some point, or in the short term, spending a little bit more money on something that is going to be a long-term investment in your health. So then, the final point that I wanted to talk about here is the ecological impact. So, I did mention before that when we use conventional methods, meaning lots of sprays, not only do they go into the air, because a lot of the time crops are being sprayed from overhead. So there's a plane that goes by and it'll spray tons of chemicals all over the crops. You have to understand that it's not just going to land on those fruits and vegetables and produce. It's going to be in the air. It is going to be breathed in by not only passers-by, but also by the animals, the birds, the insects that are there living in an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is necessary for the health of our entire planet, including for the health of ourselves. So unfortunately, in monoculture, which is when we take one piece of land, one plot of land, and we only plant one species in that space. This is called monoculture. Monoculture has absolutely revolutionized the way that we live and the way that we eat. However, it's also been extremely damaging because what happens is when we monocrop, and let's use apples again, or actually let's use corn as an example, or pretty much any other type of vegetable. But when you monocrop and you plant only corn in one area, that soil that it's grown in starts to become nutrient deficient again, because the corn has very specific recommendations. It's going to need a specific amount of nitrogen, a specific amount of lithium, a specific amount of all of the minerals, and it pulls that from the soil. And then that soil doesn't have a chance to replenish, because the next season you plant more corn there, which has the same needs as that last round of corn. So what happens is year after year, or season after season of planting the same thing in the same plot of land, that soil becomes completely deficient in its nutrients, which means that we then start to have to add things like synthetic fertilizers. We have to start to add all sorts of chemicals to help to rebalance the soil. In nature, we use what's called permaculture, and that's when you plant certain plants together which are actually beneficial to one another. So you would plant, and please don't paraphrase me on the exact plants because I'm not a permaculture expert, but let's say that you would take tomatoes and corn and zucchinis, and you would plant them all within the same plot of land one season, so that the corn, which is taking its specific amount of nutrients, the tomatoes, which is taking its specific amount of nutrients, and so are the zucchinis, they are all helping to re-deliver and rebalance the soil to keep that soil really healthy and nutritious. The next season, you would either do a very similar complementary type of planting, so you'd have complementary plants together, or you would throw a totally different type of plant, or plants, plural, in that space, so that the soil can automatically rebalance. So this is why it takes so long for organic farmers to yield food. This is why there's a much higher financial price on organic food, because it takes time, it takes effort, it takes skill, and it also takes nature. And nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. That's Lao Tzu, not my own quote. So, and a little note here that I wanna touch on. I read this really amazing book called The End of Food. It's a little dark, to be honest. Even in the title, it sounds a little dark. However, it was completely perspective shifting on the way that we work in the world, on the way that we impact the world, and on the way that agriculture affects us as a whole. But one of the points that he makes in this book is that topsoil, so that soil I was just talking about, the one that becomes nutrient deficient or becomes nutrient rich, depending on what's been planted there, that topsoil, when it's become nutrient deficient, takes for 1 inch of topsoil to be nutrient sorry, I'm forgetting the words right now, but for 1 inch of topsoil to become nutrient rich again, it can take up to 100 years. Up to 100 years, if not more than 100 years, for 1 inch of topsoil to be replenished naturally. So that's really crazy. When we look at monoculture, when we look at the entire agricultural industry, we have to look at this as like a long-term impact. And if we are, as conscious people, thinking 7 generations ahead, we're thinking about the future generations, we have to make a stand right now and start voting with our dollars and saying, that's not okay. That's not okay, because that means that our earth is being impacted. The animals and insects that live in these ecosystems are being negatively impacted because they are being bombarded with chemicals, because they are not having the right types of foods that are natural for their habitat. And unfortunately, it really does boil down to individuals, because as we know, we must be the change that we want to see. Again, another quote. If you know me, you know I love quotes. But it's true, we have to be that change. And if we want to see a healthier world, if we want to live a healthy, full, fulfilling life, then that starts with us. That starts with voting with our dollars and making sure that we're supporting the organic farmer. That means that we are making sure we're taking care of our own health so that we can be advocates, so that we can be leaders going forward in the future. So, I'm going to do a really quick recap of everything that we just spoke about, and then I'm going to offer my action steps for you. So quick recap. The first part of this call, I mentioned that words ending in "cide," C-I-D-E, literally translate in Latin to killer or the act of killing. So pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, homicide, suicide, think about it. Like, they all have to do with death. So why would we want that in our food? Little bit of food for thought. So the first point here was about our impact on our health. So eating organic versus conventional on our health. major, long-term investment as opposed to short-term cost. We really have to look at the difference here. The second point was about the ecological impact. So how is this affecting the animals, the birds, the insects, and also the topsoil? And then the third point here was the economic impact. So by choosing to not only purchase organic, but even choosing to stay within your own range, within your own area, is supporting not only local economy, but it's also going to be telling these people, and by voting with your dollars, please keep doing the good work that you're doing. All right, so a few action steps for you. In school, there are, 3 points that I really like to drive home. I talked about this a little bit on an Instagram live earlier this week about the 3 points you want to consider when you're grocery shopping. So these 3 points are, is whatever food you're about to eat, is it natural? Is it alive? And is it good quality? So natural, meaning it's unprocessed and unrefined. So a whole grain or a legume, for instance, are whole, unprocessed, unrefined. And that's versus a flour, for instance. Not to say that flour is bad. This is a total different topic for another time, but you want to go for as many whole foods as possible. So is it alive? Meaning, does it contain live enzymes? Example would be fruits, veggies, and sprouts. So anytime that you sprout legumes, beans, seeds, nuts, all of those are living foods. And then the third point is it good quality? Meaning, is it grown in nutrient-rich soil without synthetic fertilizers and free from any of the sides? This is another really important point. So when you are going to the grocery store next time, consider these 3 points. Is it natural? Is it alive? And is it good quality? And then the last point that I want to bring up here is that there is a really great list of the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. So as I mentioned at the beginning here, it's not always just about choosing and wanting to eat organic. Sometimes budget plays a huge role in that decision, and that's completely understandable. So on ewg.org, I will link it in the description box when after this call, ewg.org, you can get their list of the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. And what this list is, they update it every single year, is they will list the clean 15, so the 15 conventionally grown foods which have the lowest residual pesticides, herbicides, fungicides on it. So meaning those are going to be the 15 foods that, should you have to buy them conventional, they're going to be the safest ones to purchase because they don't actually hold on to as many pesticides as the alternative, which would be the dirty dozen. So it's also going to give you the list of the 12 foods that you want to always, always, always purchase organic because they have the highest amount of residual pesticides. So that's ewg.org, or you can just type into Google Clean 15 Dirty Dozen 2020. They've updated it recently, and I do recommend giving it a look. Print it out, keep it on your fridge. Next time you go to the grocery store, keep a mental note or a picture on your phone of which foods you want to buy organic and which ones conventional. So anyways, that is the end of this talk on why organic food is so expensive. And really, hopefully this, if there's one takeaway, it's about shifting what we believe expensive is. Is expensive, purchasing food that's going to be an investment in your health in the long term, or is the true expense going to be the lack of freedom that we have from not being healthy, from medical bills later down the road, and from the physical, mental, and emotional impact of not being well? Anyways, you guys, I appreciate you for coming onto this call today and I love hearing any kind of questions that you have. So if you have questions for a future Wellness Wednesday topic, if you'd like me to address something for you, please let me know. You can send me a message or an email, amy@namatastenutrition.com. And I want to leave you as well with a little bit of food for thought here. I am also on YouTube. I'll be putting these videos up onto YouTube, as well as some yoga videos and a lot more juicy goodness to come, including a podcast at the end of the summer. More on that later. And if you're not yet on my mailing list, I do recommend getting on there. I send out lots of really great articles, and there's some really great blog posts coming on my new site, which is launching mid-July. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the flip side. Have a really beautiful day.